Transparency, there's a lot of discussion around accountability and for sure privacy and security. However, again, who is at the table when we are thinking about creating these frameworks? And that's why I feel like I don't have a holistic answer, because there's so many big ideas out there. But at minimum, I would say at the core of what is ethical and responsible AI, it would definitely need to start with transparency.
How can we improve digital literacy to help people better understand AI and societal impact? That's what we cover in today's episode. I'm joined with AI policy expert Erica Shoemate. We talk about AI's role in national security and responsible governance, her experience at major tech companies and lessons in AI governance, cultural intelligence in AI, and unique aspects of AI policy work in DC versus pretty much anywhere else. Let's get going. Welcome back to DC Decoded, a Gen AI podcast where we break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. I'm your host, Sam Lee, part of the Gen AI DC chapter. Today, we have Erica Shoemate joining us. Erica is an AI policy expert with nearly 2 decades of experience in national security and big tech. She shaped AI governance and risk mitigation policies at the FBI, Twitter, now X, and Amazon, influencing standards via the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, now adopted by companies like Meta and Google. As founder of the N Strategy Group and an AI Global Policy Fellow at AI 2030, she advises organizations on responsible AI and digital safety. She's also a maternal health advocate, working to advance policies that address racial disparities through policy advocacy at the federal and state levels as a March of Dimes ambassador. She was additionally honored with the 2024 Black AI Think Tank AI Policy and Advocacy Award. Erica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sam, for having me. I'm so excited to be here and be able to speak to you and your audience today.
Of course, let's get into it. So you've clearly had a dynamic career so far, FBI, DOJ, X, Amazon, just to name a few. Walk us through what you've learned so far in those spaces and how it has led to your current work.
Boy, that's like a loaded question. So I will say, of course, spending majority of my career, I will say I grew up in the FBI professionally. I spent more than a decade, like 11 plus years, quite frankly, at the FBI in different field offices. I've also had some short stints overseas. And I will say being in an environment where literally the work you're doing has the impact and implication of life or death really shapes your world, quite frankly, and how you see things. So things that are where people may say is pressing, I'm like, well, is someone dying? And if not, that's just where we are. And also, I would say that the FBI, because of being a intel analyst, like starting out as a very young junior analyst, I was able to, start out at the academies where they send the analysts similar to the agents. And so you spend weeks down there learning analytic tradecraft. And I will say that the training and also some of the advanced training we get, once you're, further on in your career, really help me to be able to quickly parse data, be able to look at a situation and be able to act quickly on it. And also being okay with having these risks. I know a lot of people can be risk averse, but when you're in those type of situations, you just have to go with the information that you have. And I will say because of that, I was able to really pivot on a dime. I had to be super agile in my role at the Bureau, and it could be any day of the week, and I always found myself preparing for the day by looking at current events, the news around the world before I would even go into the office every day, just because it could potentially impact my day. And being able to take those skills of being, data analysis, being able to write, we had to know how to write, we had to know how to brief, and we had to know how to brief very clearly and concisely, get to the point, what we call it bluff, bottom line up front. And it's actually something that I bring along like throughout whoever I'm talking to, dealing with, whether I'm leading a team, I'm talking to someone from a consultation. Those are the things that are super important. People want to know what is the problem, and then we can get to how we can solve it. So that's what I would say in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who might not know what is AI 2030? What is happening in 2030 and what's the relevance to AI there?
Yeah. So the relevance to AI 2030 is really being focused on this very forward thinking and being super futuristic around, for me and my lane around AI 2030 is being focused on human-centered policy development and ensuring that those just the core requirements for human-centered development is something that is not just a US-based ordeal, but it is something that we're able to scale around the globe. Like we're all thinking about AI in the same way. And when I say we, I just mean like countries and companies in general around the globe. And so my piece to that has really been very forward leaning in a sense of calling a thing. And when you think about human-centered development, there's a lot of discussion around harm and how will this technology have impact on other humans. And in some ways, we don't know everything, but in some ways, we've already seen the harm that can happen. And as one, for listeners who may not be seeing this on camera, I am a Black, woman, and I am always about like getting down to like the floor, right? The very basic level. Okay. Mitigate bias is such a big topic, but then I'm like, okay, what are we doing? It seemed like there's just so many papers, so many things out there. And my thought is when thinking about AI 2030 and where we're trying to go as a whole is people. We have to go meet other people where they are, meaning the most underrepresented communities as a part of this lack of data, being a part of these systems. We got to go out into the community if we truly want to manifest the change in the data and prevent it from being so Eurocentric. So these are the real things that I call out. There is no time to be politically correct if we're truly trying to solve the issue. It's like you have to be okay with being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's part of, I know, a long answer. AI 2030 is my kind of lane in that.
Good to know. And just backing up a step, how do you define artificial intelligence or AI? There are, of course, like objective scientific definitions, but in the nature of these human-centered discussions, for people who aren't as familiar with what AI even is as a concept, how do you define it and how does that influence your work?
Yeah, no, great call out. So I define AI as any technical, I'm going to start it like even just as simple as a computer, a machine. You hear machine learning a lot, that is able to automate things, but more so it's not just the automation piece, but be able to learn human behavior. And over time, being able to streamline, let's say, said process and being able to then. And the good about AI is that it will actually, in some ways, make things more efficient, or it has made things more efficient. And so for people who don't know a lot about what is AI, it's literally like taking data. It can be out in the world, on the internet, open sources, which like how you have open AI. And it can also be as simple as your hospital HIPAA complying data, where it's being used to really assess if, let's say, you may be more prone to a certain disease, and being able to then take that technical data, and I'm trying to say it in like the more basic form for your everyday person, and being able to then take that information over time. Let's say you come in, let's say we're watching you for over a year at a doctor's office, and we're looking specifically at your blood pressure levels, and you're tracking those over time. We're artificial intelligence, and like, what is it? You're putting that information into the system, to a computer. And over time, that computer system, I call it the brain, is then able to then take a look at and assess if, let's say, your numbers, along with some of your family history, can tell you, are you more prone to being, someone who may have high blood pressure or not? And the doctors, trust me, or the clinicians and providers, they're not looking at this stuff like manually anymore. They don't have time. So being able to use basically your computer at your desk, but in the back end, there is a technical system that is ingesting the data. I call it the brain for its very simple terms, and being able to take that information over time and continuing to learn the behavior. And you have to have humans to be able to provide the data. So I want people to remember that humans still have to be involved. And so when there is this blame game of mitigating bias, at the end of the day, a human is responsible for the data that is being ingested into the brain of the computer system that is pulling this data and being able to replicate it in a way that, again, can be used for good or it can be weaponized. That answered the question?
Yes, no, it did for sure. And yeah, you've spoken about this concept of generative responsible AI policy, which I think is getting to some of the themes you're talking about. And what does that responsible AI governance look like, maybe both at a national level and maybe a global level based on your experiences?
Yeah. When you think about responsible AI, there's a lot of conversation around ethics, and then there's safety. For me, something could be ethical. Something could be legal, but is it ethical? Right? And depending on where you are in the world, maybe not. And when I think about governance and responsible AI at the very basic level, for me, I need to be looking at the safety part of it. Because again, as my lived experience has informed me, I am a first generation college graduate from inner city Memphis. Now I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been here almost 13 years. So the way that I even see the world is going to be completely different from anyone else. So for me, again, the ethics piece is at such a high level. And I would consider myself to be a very strategic person. But in order for the everyday person to understand what you are saying and the whole see something, say something, you got to bring it back to a level that they can understand. So safety first. When I think about ethics and that whole balance of freedom of expression, and you're trying to mitigate harms at the very basic level, we really, as we think about what is ethical, I think the bigger question is it safe? And safe for whom? Then, because ethical in many ways is subjective. Your world, depending on your cultural exposure, could render how you think about ethics completely different. When you think about it, going back to ethics, is something right or is it something wrong? At a very basic level, cultural nuance really matters as we see that. I know there's a whole framework out there about, thinking about like the safety and how people in these big companies are supposed to be considering the data. The issue that I have sometimes with what is responsible AI is the fact that it's too big to the point that I feel like no one is reading it. And there's just I call it a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors. I know people have good intention, but I struggle when we think about what is ethical because of the people that are putting these ethics together to say this is ethical, this is not. It's not typically very diverse. So that's why I don't have like an answer for the answer, but for your question, because I do think that we have to really consider, again, the society you are in and the world you're in is going to shape what you see as being ethical versus what is not ethical.
Right.
And so, and depending on where you are in the world as well, right? That, piece. And then ethical, I will say the number one thing for me when I think about being ethical, transparency, full stop. Transparency. And I know it took me a long time to get to transparency, but transparency, there's a lot of discussion around accountability and for sure privacy and security. However, again, who is at the table when we are thinking about creating these frameworks? And that's why I feel like I don't have a holistic answer because there's so many big ideas out there. But at minimum, I would say at the core of what is ethical and responsible AI, it would definitely need to start with transparency, number one. And I know people are like, we're getting better, but for whatever reason, I know that minorities, underrepresented communities don't still necessarily feel safe to use this. This is very skeptical, and I can't blame the healthy form of skepticism, but I do teach and out in the communities about like digital literacy, AI literacy as well, because again, we don't get to be at the table most of the time. So yes, a very long round way of saying.
And you've worked at some of these private tech companies who are at the forefront of some of these innovations, especially around AI. What did you see when you were doing trust and safety work there? What are these companies doing well? What can they improve on? Like, what did you see when you worked there?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things that I saw coming from the FBI and being at a private company was I sometimes struggled when things were clearly safety issues. They did not violate the company's policy, and you could see the disproportionate harm that was being caused. Like for example, I focused a lot on women's safety, things that were considered to be toxic, but not necessarily violate the company's policies. And also looking at underrepresented groups, looking at global events and who were disproportionately impacted by some of these global real-time events, looking at journalists, looking at public officials, particularly women. You would see some of the disproportionate harm. And sometimes I would like cringe at the idea that because they are a public official, then it should be acceptable for someone to say some of the most vile things that I have ever seen. And again, my lived experience shapes the way that I view the world, right? And it goes back to the balance of freedom of expression while trying to mitigate on and offline platform harm. I know one of the things we used to talk about at Twitter all the time was, safety for whom, freedom for whom. And we know when people are generally thinking about that, it's definitely not the brown, the dark browns, light browns, and blacks that they're talking about. And we as a collective, we don't get the same level of grace if we were to say something that I seen for folks who aren't brown. So a white person versus someone like me. Again, I know the teams and my teams, they were really working to be super objective. So it's not them. It is just the people making these big decisions. I really have an issue with that, with this whole thing about social media companies not being the arbiters of truth. I'm like, that is completely irresponsible because we know words matter. And this whole idea, I remember growing up, so I'm a news junkie, I should say. I'm a recovering news junkie. I've done a lot better the last few months. But again, my world was shaped by things happening around the globe, right, for so long. But growing up, if someone was telling straight up lies, they didn't get airtime. It was cut. And now we are allowing people to be online just saying whatever when they have so much influence that it literally causes real world harm. And that within itself for me is something that I grapple with every single day, because you do have the one thing of like, oh, we're not trying to censor speech, but to what point? There's another political pundit. She actually talks about it too. If it starts to harm someone, it's no longer free speech. And so these are the things that, like what I saw, and then coming from the world of like the Bureau, the only thing that I saw that was different, like thinking about like domestic work and domestic terrorism versus international terrorism, I will say the U.S. Does not have any real policies as it relates to domestic terrorism, again, because the whole idea of like freedom of speech. But the last thing I'll say on this point is people are getting hurt right now in real time. And that is where we have skewed so far right, left, and different, because we are so afraid, again, being politically incorrect, that we are just allowing people that have this influence to just be on TV and say whatever. And then you say it is for the person to then go do their research. And I'm like, that is a bunch of bananas and crazy, especially when you think about teenagers in the US still being able to have access to social media. We know just like from a psychological standpoint, a brain development standpoint, teenagers aren't even thinking with the same part of the brain because they're too young that way you would as an adult. So how do you put this onus on children to be able to decipher what's real and what's not. And then it'll be the question with the parents. No. The entire society has a duty and responsibility to protect our youth, full stop. And I love to see Australia, EU, doing some things that are different, because we see kids are killing themselves, committing suicide. And I know it may not seem like that was like relevant to some of the part of the question, but these were things that I saw and really would have very deep conversations around why we were deciding one way or another.
Yeah, I'm curious what examples come to mind for you where speech has turned into crime, because America does protect freedom of speech, but we also have laws to obviously prosecute criminals. So what examples would you?
We're not using it. Perfect example. I may need a security detail when it's all said and done, but thinking about the whole January 6th, we saw a lot of the uptick, and I get like from a U.S. parent company side of things, why you have to operate a certain way. I got it. However, the uptick of like harm and I being put in a position of like, I can't make the decision I necessarily want to make in that moment because it's not going to get supported anyway. Seeing what happened on January 6th, 2021, as someone, I'll give you some backdrop of those 2 days. So my uncle passed away on that Monday, the 4th, in the wee hours of the morning due to COVID. He's a leukemia survivor, my only paternal uncle, and we had just lost his wife, call our aunt, but so is my cousin's mom, literally like a week and a half in between the time. It was just crazy times. And that was Monday. Tuesday was the U.S. congressional runoff in Georgia. And so I was like, okay, I'm not my best, but I need to get online because I don't want to leave my team high and dry, and things are really starting to uptick. Because before then, again, some backstory coming from the Bureau, I understood election integrity at a very different level than most people at these companies. And that was something, foreign influence, all these things that I understood at just a very different level. But not being able to act on some of those things was very frustrating, in the sense of like, we were doing, again, the people were doing the work. So I don't want it to come off as like they were doing what they could with what we had. And some of that was like seeing, we had decided, how certain things would be because of, did it show any indicators or signals? Was this harmful? Were they talking about something else? And so we had to make a big leadership decisions around what we would consider to be violative or not, because we were entering different times. And so getting to January 6th the next day, that was something, again, you could see the uptick in things going south, and the propensity for harm was definitely there. We saw the chatter, you saw all the things online. However, it wasn't until after it all went awry that then we were able to do really something. At that point, we're reactive. It's too late. The seeds are already sown. And I just think about my time in national security. You do not want to be on the side of cleaning up when it's all gone bad. And what is baffling for me, again, I swore an oath to the U.S. Constitution to literally uphold the U.S. Constitution and to protect the American people. That is my job, whether I'm in or out. Why? Because I know things. I've been given this special privileges to these certain things that no matter if I'm not ever in government again, I took that oath. And it's quite funny. We're 4 years later and it's like it never happened. For me, it's like a dagger to the chest because of my lived experience. It's so easy to forget when you have that privilege that I and my people will never be able to have. Oh, it's not a big deal. Like, perfect example is as some of the things that are going on now. You have a 25-year-old young man has spewed Nazi hate stuff all over the internet. designs and then they bring them back. And had I been a person that was writing that type of stuff online, 18, 19, 20, I would have never gotten in government. And I had to really think about my life and doing the quote unquote right things well before I even considered being in national security. And so to have that exception and to be like, oh, it's just a boy is mind blowing. And again, some of this stuff is still up online. And so you want to talk about, how, examples, these are vivid examples that are out there right now. And also one last kind of thought of criticism I'm thinking about is also some of the anti-Semitic things that we are seeing, and to see that the ADL is not taking the right side of history stance is shocking, quite frankly, because some of the civic, society organizations were people that I dealt with on a regular in my former roles. And was literally screaming to the top of the lungs about any little thing. Some of the stuff was like not even worth reaching out about. But now you're saying that these things are acceptable. And that, again, is hard to, quote unquote, regulate in the sense of like, now we're in alternative facts. Oh, he didn't mean it or she didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. And that is a very hard thing to fight. And on the flip side, again, not, get into any great details, but just seeing some of our companies here in the US kind of like taking a step back on things that we know are wrong because they are being bullied. That means I was already unsafe. I'm definitely unsafe, even more unsafe now.
Yeah.
And that's a lot.
Yeah. One last topic I wanted to dive a bit deeper into is this concept of digital literacy that you had mentioned earlier, and how you've been in communities and helping them improve it. How do we do that? How do we as a country improve digital literacy, better understand AI, societal impact? I think that's something that, despite all of the things we might disagree on as Americans, like that's something I think a lot of people can agree on. So what have you seen on the ground, and how can we keep getting better at educating people on digital literacy?
Yeah. I think, again, meeting people where they are. We can't just say, go look at this training online. We are still having issues, even though, with the last administration, there was a lot of work to be done around critical infrastructure and, broadband in rural areas, et cetera. However, we must remember that there are some places and some people that, again, when you're disproportionately living below the poverty line, even those basic things you may not be able to get, or if you have it, it could be very spotty. And I am a believer in you can't learn people from a desk. We have to go out into the communities at a grassroots level to be able to teach on just the very basic concepts of, again, what you mentioned earlier. What is AI? What is AI to you? Is it probably a better kind of thought process about it? How is it used? Do you know you're using it every day? Like giving those real world example and making it a conversation. And so that's really where I have been able to turn the tide and remind communities that are very skeptical, and rightfully so, because of the weaponization of technology. Thinking about, redlining, credit reporting, all these things where data has been used against, certain communities. You're like, I'm not putting my information in there. And so one thing that I do teach at a very basic level too is operational security around what you should and should not put inside of AI, unless it's short of it being your own and you made it yourself. Some things, right? Like, PII things. You also want to think about social engineering. You don't want to put like all of your friends and family. I tell people, put brackets, you can put X's, you can put Jane Doe, Joe, whoever, flip the names around. If you have numbers, don't put them exact, right? But some people are like, again, you can come from a place of either being super trusty of these systems or like, I ain't touching it at all. It's like these
exactly
extremes. And so when I'm able to then speak on not only this can be a good thing, and also this is how it can be used not for a good thing, and this is what you can do to protect yourself, now you're giving the people something to work with.
And can
right?
you define PII for people who might not know
Oh
what that term
yes,
is?
your personal information. I'm gonna make it super simple, like your name, your date of birth, your whole address. Probably don't want to put your blood type, but whatever. That's compliant. Your social security number, those
Right.
type of things. You definitely want to be mindful of those things. And again, you can trick the system. You just need to remember, like, for instance, this is a good tip for those who are listening. If you're like, well, I'm trying to be efficient. AI makes my life super efficient. I'm like, I can relate. What you can do is you can use a Google Doc. And let's say you have your name everywhere in a document. You can go to Google Doc, hit Control F, put what you're looking for, your name, and then you can say replace all with whatever you want, your name, my name, whatever you want to call it, XXX. That is already a very efficient way to be using something that is really cool at being able to be more efficient, but you're also protecting yourself. And I always remind people, it may not even, when hackers and bad people are out there, it's not even always about you, the person. It could be someone that you are connected to, again, social engineering. And so I challenge people to, I provide very thought-provoking questions to think deeper than just yourself, because that's the tactical piece. These hackers, a lot of them, especially if they're state sponsored, it's a very strategic thing. I'm like, trust you, little you is not all of it, And so I just challenge people in the communities. If you are someone who is teaching about, digital literacy, and you haven't thought about, okay, how can I make it so simple for people to get it, and that it will open up their minds to want to use it more? That is a way you can say it, like, good at, but this is how you can protect yourself. It's just like anything, right?
Right. Which is important for all of us to know.
Yeah.
One last question for you.
Sure.
What is unique about working on AI related matter in DC compared to other places in the States that do this type of work? So Silicon Valley, New York, any other American place that has a vested interest in tech. What's unique about DC?
I think what's unique about DC is that, policy change is where it happens right here in the bubble. As most people say, things are changing rapidly, or it can change rapidly in real time. And the rest of the country may not even be aware of things that might be shifting. But when you live here and you're in a way of you're in the know, not necessarily who you know, but you're listening to, again, my world, little bits and pieces of data, and you're like, okay, what is shifting? What is happening? And being that you're right here where it's all happening, I believe you have a different vantage point, where I know DC gets a bad rep for, you're living in a bubble, you don't understand the real world, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, fine. Good point. However, as someone, again, that did not come from a lot, I actually think I have a pretty cool vantage point of I can see okay, oh, there's, the smartness of things, but I also can see at a very basic, I'm just going to call it a very basic street sense level of this is what is happening. And if I needed to articulate and explain the shift, I could easily do that to an everyday person. So being that DC is where it's happening, right? You're having companies out of Silicon Valley having to at least have a second headquarters here because of the rapid shift in policy. So that is saying a lot right there. And being able to have that influence, think about it. You don't have to go get a hotel if you live here. You don't have to do that. You could just literally make a call with your representative. And hey, I'm going to meet y'all on the Hill. You may not meet the representative or the senator that day, but you're going to meet one of their
staffers. Their staffers, yeah.
Right? And they have a duty and responsibility to speak with their constituents. So you don't have to be a lobbyist, people, in order to be able to speak to the people who represent you. And I think that is actually one of the most coolest things about living here in this area. I was just on the Hill last week for March for Change, which was a March of Dimes, big day on the Hill, day and a half on the Hill, and being able to live here, be in it, and being able to do follow-ups in real time. And if I wanted to meet with one of the people I met with, I don't have to think about coordinating a flight. I could just be hey, let's just meet up, right? That is so cool to me.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, Erica, this was great. I learned a lot. Thank you for sharing both your professional and personal experiences. And I really appreciate the time. And I'm sure everyone else listening will as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this episode of DC Decoded. I want to thank Erica again for her time. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to DC Decoded on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And if you found this discussion valuable, we'd love it if you left a rating or review. It helps others discover the show. For more on the DC chapter of the Gen AI Collective, upcoming events, and ways to get involved, check out the links in the show description. If you're interested in collaborating, sponsoring, or just learning more, don't hesitate to reach out via the information in the description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 Wednesdays for the next episode.